Are we going to get? Are we live? I'm assuming we're not.
Yep.
We are live.
Yep.
Hi, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a very comfortable break. Pip's having his now. Pip's back. So, thanks for being with us. I hope that offered a sort of a breadth of views. I think that was really useful, having a festival point of view, a large scale point of view, and hopefully sort of a small scale point of view. And I think it's often tricky to imagine how other people react to demands you put on the situation in terms of I know there's a question coming up about setting green riders, so it's really good to be able to put these questions to everyone. Now we're welcoming Claire O'Neill, who, can I ask you to introduce yourself and explain your
Yeah, absolutely, no problem. Thank you, first of all, for all the organisation and bringing this together, and the presentations were brilliant before as well, so thanks for that. So I work with Arcadia, have done, I think, largely since around 2014, although I've known Pip since we were about 20, trying to cause all sorts of adventures in festivals around Europe. But my role with Arcadia has included being an aerialist, show manager, creative production. But for the purpose of today, I work as a sustainability manager with Arcadia and developed the Green Rider that we took with us on tour. As a greener festival, which is why I was in a position to be able to do that, we're a not-for-profit organisation and we work around the world with festivals, touring productions, venues, arenas, specifically on sustainability.
Great. And I'm just going to fire away with the first question to Mark. It's about writing Green Riders, and someone's saying that they're struggling to find the right tone between, they don't want to assume presenters haven't thought through things, but they want to, at the same time, be quite forceful in what they ask for. Have you got any tips? And are you aware templates of Green Riders? Where might people find those?
Yeah, okay. Well, I wouldn't assume that a presenter had thought through those things. It might not necessarily mean that it's not important to them, but they're also juggling budgets, logistics, program, volunteer. You know, they've got a lot going on. So from my mind, and I would class the thinking that happens in our festival, there's a lot of goodwill. We work across the entire organisation when we think about environmental sustainability, as in across our communications, across our education programmes, as well as the production, delivery and other elements. And we have regular meetings, and we have an ambitious action plan that is now moving away from single-use plastic water bottles and more into digital impacts of a lot of our work moving online in terms of how we talk about the festival, and really starting to understand the impact of that side of things. So I wouldn't assume that a festival presenter would feel sort of undermined or surprised by getting a Green Rider. What I honestly believe is that if everybody embraces it and it starts to become normal, then that's how you build that change, and you normalize it, and then presenters do consider it alongside the technical requirements and the hospitality requirements that we're all used to from presenting artists. There is a couple of, thank you, Hannah. There is a useful template from a greener festival. Julie's Bicycle also have a template. I think it's hard to generalize because it will vary so much from artist to artist. But I think all I would encourage people to think about is it really from the top to the bottom of your work, and what you as a company and your you know, how you want to be received, basically. Because I go to other festivals and you'll still get a lanyard in a little plastic case, and you'll still get disposable crockery and cutlery, and you think, crikey. And a lot of that is to do with the pace at which festivals work and their budgets. But I think together, if we all sort of agree that this is how we want to work, then that's how you can change those things. I don't know, Claire, if it's worth you outlining the areas that were covered in Arcadia's Green Riders.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with what you're saying there as far as it needs to be a process of communication. And if everybody starts to come on board so it's normalized, then you're not kind of putting someone's back up or annoying the production team or causing surprises when you present a Green Rider. And just before talking about the detail, the process of creating it as well. On the Green Rider that we've done with Arcadia and also on the link that's shared there, we were looking at it not as a we're coming in and telling you how it should be because we know best, because bearing in mind we're going to all different countries all around the world, all different cultures, all different environments ecologically, and we don't necessarily know what is the right thing to do in that environment. So we made sure that when we make a request, for example, that we want to have reusables, no bottled water and water supply on site, we need to be able to have the feedback of what are the obstacles to that on this site that we're going to, where maybe there isn't potable water available, full stop. You know, so there has to be a kind of, within the Green Rider, there needs to be a instigation of that kind of two-way conversation. And we worked quite a lot with Arcadia and communication when we were having our team meetings in advance to go, how do we want this to come across? Because of that very reason, we didn't want to be preachy. And also we wanted to learn as we go along as well. So some of the details, things like there's the plastics, trying to reduce single-use plastics, not having wasteful giveaways. Communication with the audience and the crew was another thing that we included. We wanted to see that the way that the event was being promoted was in a way that was in line with what our values were as well. Bearing in mind that Arcadia is often a headline feature of an event. We also looked at how things are being powered, water, wastage and supply. And then we went into the detail of the food, especially as well. Is it possible to have local food? Is it possible for any waste food to be recovered? Or can we avoid the waste food in the first place? I mean, rather than going through it all, because you can just read the examples that are out there, but these are some of the main themes that we were looking at.
There's a good point there with the tone of it as well. There's almost two completely different ways of going about it. One is, we're doing the show, you must do what we say to make it green. The other thing is, we don't just offer you a show, we offer you a show that's got a whole ethic and a meaning and a purpose. And part of making the show really work for you is we need you to commit to this and make it work holistically throughout the event and not just within the show. And that was the nice twist of the tone. It stopped being preachy, we're not coming if you don't do this, and starting to be, we want to do this together with you. Let's collaborate and make it great.
I think that is, I'm just thinking back to sort of circular economy things. You're presenting a service rather than a product. So you're coming and you're creating this environment. Of course, it is interesting what you're saying, Pip, and Claire as well, is not wanting to preach or not telling people how to be. But there is a time when you kind of have to nail your colours to the mast, isn't there? Is there a tension? What do you feel about that tension between, because you can control an area in a festival, unlike a lot of acts or people arriving, you can control an area and you can say it's going to be this way inside this area. Is there a tension there? What do you feel?
I'd say that when there's certain things that you're sure about and you know that it's possible, then if it's not being provided, then I think it would be fair to put your foot down and say, actually, like, we know that it's not necessary to have all of this waste, for example. We know that there is the ability to deal with it in a different way, and therefore that's how it needs to be. I think that there's a degree of being quite humble in some respects, and knowing that you don't know it all as well, because even if you know the kind of the key principle, like for instance, to not have to burn loads of waste, you don't necessarily know what the best route is wherever you go. But I think when you do know that and you're certain with that, that is when I think it's fair to throw your weight around a little bit.
So bide your time. And I suppose you have to know that you know a lot about the situation before you, as you say, throw your weight around. Have you got any examples? Any sort of, I know, Pip, you talked really well about your experiences, but have you got any sort of examples that come to mind where you thought, wow, they really nailed it. I wish everyone else did what that host event did?
Well, slightly off necessarily the Green Rider topic, but we got invited out to India a few years ago to design a stage out there. And we got really excited and we thought, oh, India, that'd be a great place to make something out of scrap. And we went out there sort of quite cocky, really, saying that we'd build them something. And they took us around all the shipyards where they break all the ships and all that sort of stuff. We saw some amazing stuff. But literally, they cut a panel off the side of a ship and it would drop down to the ground like a great big, weighing tons. Literally, almost before it had hit the ground, a group of people would come and grab it and whisk it into a hut. And by the time you got to the hut, it was already being turned into a big frying pan or whatever it is. And there wasn't actually any waste out there to recycle. We kind of got, it was more expensive to build it out of recycled materials out there than it would have anything else because they had such a good system for already processing it.
It's like one of those, you kind of want to put yourself out of business, don't you? You want to be so inspiring that there's just no materials left. There was a question for Pip about are there any problems or technicalities around presenting about, I suppose, certificates and safety? Say I've got a 12 lorry loads worth of crane. I want to crack on. What are the stages you would go through to be able to take reclaimed materials and then present them to an audience?
Yeah, it's certainly more difficult in some respects. Bertie would be the one to answer that. He's the technical director and he's much more realistic about ideas when we go and throw mad ideas around. And to be fair, we probably looks like we just chuck things together, but we probably go through quite a lot of options to get there. But I think the thing with us has just been over-engineering stuff. So that spider weighs nearly 50 tons, that tripod, which is insane, So we have got it rated to hang 16 tons off it or whatever. Whereas if you wanted to make a tripod out of raw material to hang that sort of weight, you'd probably do it with, 10% of the material that is used. So you do have to over-engineer stuff. And that's where it gets a bit crazy, touring over-engineered heavyweight stuff. And that's where if we tour stuff again, we probably will start using much more new materials than we would have before, because we can now see in the lifespan of this material it's going to consume a lot of energy to move it, and therefore we need, we might need to use very lightweight materials.
Yeah, there is that tension again, isn't there? Between it's really there are a million resources that we could go to probably balance new steel versus reclaimed steel, and or a list of materials. It's hard.
Well, the big thing that was said right at the beginning is if you know where you're trying to get to, you can plan as cleverly as you can how to get there. But if you've got that privilege and as far as you can see in the future, obviously that's the more sustainable you can make a product. But if you're working sort of, certainly when we started out, I'm sure for a lot of people, you don't really know where it's going to go, so you're working bit by bit. So it's a constant battle really between the reality of just getting something done and planning ahead.
Do you feel that's really changed in the lifespan of the company? Do you feel, what are your thoughts about the work cycle?
Yeah, it has for us, because as a company now, we're going out there as a bunch of people with 10, 15 years experience under our belts, looking for work that we can apply that knowledge to. Whereas 10 years ago, we didn't have that, but we were younger, much more driven.
Yeah.
And had much newer and fresher ideas, I suppose, than those that have been around for a while.
There's another question about power. I was going to maybe it's to go around everyone. Are there any thoughts on the most sustainable power generation or power use, or your thoughts? I guess you've all run into the use of power. What's your Mark? What's your feelings? Sorry.
Well, I can talk a little bit more about the work we're trying to do in the city centre here, in the park, in a city centre park. This is the work that I'm doing through the Accelerator program, which has been fantastic so far. And really, the idea is is quite simple and straightforward, and I think it's going to be quite simple and straightforward to actually implement, and that is literally to run significant hard power into the park so that it eliminates the need for anybody who's presenting anything in there to bring in generated power. Because obviously with generators, you're burning fuel, but you're also having to truck them from wherever they are to wherever you need them and back again. And when I stopped and thought about the park, we're in there for 2 weeks every year. The city council's in there. There's about 4 or 5 other festivals. And when you tot it up, it's about, not including get in and get out time, which you also need power for, but at just presentation time, it's pushing 25, 30 days a year. And each time something happens in there, generators are trucked in, they burn fuel, they're trucked out, they're trucked back in again, they burn fuel. And we're in a city centre, you know, there's power, there's water, there's the things that we need. And all we need is to work together to be able to actually find a way, find a system, which is mainly boiling down to the finances of the matter, to be frank, because it's a relatively large upfront cost, and then a very quickly declining maintenance and operating cost. So when you take the costs that everybody pays for the freighting, the hire, and the running of their generators, and you put that in a pot, it's a very few number of years that it is taken to actually cover the cost of installing it. The city council here in Norwich are really behind it. It's their land. It will be their property. So at the minute we're exploring the model where they effectively pay for it, and then it's paid back through, you know, if it costs £100 to rent the park for a day, it would now cost £100 plus X amount to have access to the power, and then the actual cost of the power itself. But it becomes a great story for the city and actually embeds in people's minds that this is a sustainable cultural venue, outdoor venue for the city centre, which I love the idea of as well. Rather than it being a park that sometimes hosts events, it actually becomes a space where sustainable events happen for that city. So rather than thinking about how do we do it, I'm quite confident in that we can manage this process. What I really want to explore is how do we communicate that this has happened in a positive way and encourage other people to do the same, because it in itself isn't a complex idea. It's an idea that's easy to win over people's hearts on, but there is a process to be gone through, particularly around the cost and how that works. So that's what we're working on here, but obviously we don't work in greenfield sites where it's probably much more difficult to be able to do those things.
Well, Claire, what's your thoughts?
I think that the fact that there's going to be a mains connection put into this site is absolutely brilliant, because all the things that Mark's highlighted, reducing the trucking for a start, and then without having the generators, that means you don't have that particulate matter, so things that cause respiratory disease and air pollution. You negate that from the event site. Obviously, it depends on where the mains power is coming from. And that helps because a lot of the cities are saying that you're not allowed to make these emissions anymore as well. So kind of looking into the future is going to be more beneficial. And also the other thing that you need to do is correctly specify how much power you need so that you're not over-speccing generators. There's a good report by Powerful Thinking that explains all that in detail. But if you're on mains power, that actually doesn't matter because you only take as much as you need. Minimizing the amount of energy in the first place is really key. And then there are things like HVO, hydro-treated vegetable oil, which is lower carbon emissions depending on how it's used, that can be looked into. There's also battery technology is being used a lot, but we need to be aware that there's a lot of work being done about how long batteries will last for and how they can be captured correctly and make sure that they can be reused again, because there's a lot of extraction of raw materials for creating the batteries, and if they get misused and thrown away incorrectly, then there's a lot of toxic materials that come from that as well. So whilst there's huge benefits, and this is clearly the way that we're going internationally as well as nationally, there does need to be care around the use of batteries, but it does help with reducing emissions and improving efficiencies in many cases as well.
Thank you. There's a question coming in. I'm going to probably throw this one to Pip, although Claire, please throw in if you think so. There's someone's asking about fire effects, large and small. What is the, which you might, I guess you've looked into, what's the most sustainable solution to fire effects, do you think, or what are your thoughts on that, Pip?
Yeah, we use recycled vegetable oil. So obviously the thing with using vegetable oil is it obviously releases a lot of carbon, but it releases the same amount of carbon as it's absorbed when it grew in the first place. So you've got a bit of a cycle there. At least you're not adding carbon into the atmosphere that's been locked in the ground since the dinosaurs or whenever. And then there's various sorts of that. I'm afraid it would be, but again, to answer exactly what the various different forms of natural oils that you can use. The thing with the recycled vegetable oil is well, for one, it stinks, so it smells like a fish and chip shop, and for two, it's quite just not a very precise thing to be burning. And
is that what you?
Go on.
Go on.
Well, just it also gives off a big cloud of smoke as well, so it looks pretty rough.
Is that what, do you use the vegetable oil throughout your Arcadia shows now?
As much as we can. It's very difficult internationally. And
Yeah.
some places, some places we're not. Yeah.
You'd have to be touring your own refining plant with you, which might be a problem, I guess. And Claire, have you got anything?
There are lots of other things to explore. I mean, when we came up with the idea of doing flame systems off recycled vegetable oil, everyone just laughed and laughed and laughed, and you're not seriously going to do that, are you? And we did it, and now it's a thing. I mean, we were lucky. We had to get quite a lot of money to develop it, but in hindsight, we could have gone to some universities and got them to develop it. And there's loads of other sources for making flame systems. It would be great if other people cracked other things. But the stuff that we cracked went on to the guys that helped us design it. They went on to make more of these systems. So it's great if you can crack these things. It's brilliant. It helps everybody.
Is that top secret knowledge, or is that something that's sort of spreading out through the sector?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's not. We wouldn't keep it secret at all. If anyone wants to get in touch with us for more advice, we'd be happy to help. Totally.
Yeah, I think it's quite a process to get. At the moment, the biggest bangs and the biggest effects are coming from very high energy sources, and so the experimentation has been really interesting. For instance, with the Spitfire system, there needs to be a way to make it so that the gas can compress enough to have the same explosive effect, which can be done, but it all takes trial error investigation and investment as well into those kinds of studies, which was great with the trials that were able to be done because of the Bristol, the Green City, Bristol, I forget the way that it's called, Bristol Green City. Then there's also natural gas that can be used, which is coming from biodigesters. But again, it's really about trying to find ways to use materials that have already absorbed the carbon from the atmosphere, so you're not taking things from fossil fuels. And I think that's where we can start for now, but then it depends on your application as well, because when you're burning different types of fuels, depending on what your performance is, it depends on the proximity to people, to the performers. So something that's a bio version of a fuel might not have the same safety in a confined space or whatever it may be. So I think we need to take it on a case-by-case basis, and there is more work to be done in that field as well, because we all like a spectacular show.
Yeah, one thing I'll say in defense of the flames as well is it's funny, it's a very easy target, which is why it was great for us to change it to biofuel, because it made a great story. Everyone's like, Arcadia sustainable? What about the flames? Oh, biofuel. Oh, okay, blah, blah, blah. And it made a big press story. But actually, if you take apart an event, the amount of gas that's used for the flames is actually really minimal compared to what people use driving there, compared to what they would have used in a weekend running hot baths at home or whatever it is. It's really important to be quite scientific about where your energy use is.
Yeah, I think the work of your scale is just delivering sort of the consumption per audience member is brought down, isn't it? And it sounds really exciting because I think, as you say, we're in the business of spectacle and excitement, and this seems a very exciting field. That if there are sort of greener solutions to making massive explosions, that's really exciting. Are there any other exciting, inspiring things going on in that field that's good to talk about?
Yeah, well, that's kind of our new where we're going now. Really, is just trying to figure out what are the next two things, if you like. Claire, did I interrupt? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say we're looking at fireworks as well, and the impact of fireworks for one of the Green Events and Innovations conferences, and then looking at how can you make something that makes groups of people go, oh, but that isn't going to causing the same kind of waste or effects, I guess. And there's so much development now in relation to lighting and different technologies that you can use that maybe have the same full sky effect, but that don't necessarily use the same amount of power or explosive. So this is a really interesting kind of field to look into as well, like other ways to make the big impact without necessarily the explosions.
Yeah.
Although, like Pip was saying as well, I remember years back I used to say, well, maybe it's good to be able to use fuel in the right ways. Like, for instance, making a huge effect for a massive party is a very good way to use energy if you're going to, rather than wasting it all on the journey to the event.
Well, I suppose the method of people uniting around a fire is like intrinsic to our DNA and goes way, way back. And for me personally, the idea of just trying to remove that is not really going to help us progress, because I think those gatherings, those moments are really important. And I think by bringing fire back into festivals on a large scale, I mean, you see those pictures, it is like people gathering around a bonfire, just amplified, a lot's come out of that.
I'm reading through some questions. I'm not very good at reading at the moment. Is there if you had to choose, I suppose if you whistle round, maybe start with Mark, if there was the single decision, and let's take budgetary considerations out of it, what single sort of change would you make to your organisation or your events to deliver sustainability?
Well, I think a lot of events have to wrestle with the travel considerations of audiences. It's been mentioned earlier on today. When your event is actually happening, yes, you can look at the lights, you can look at the energy, you can look at the waste, you can look at the water, but then you're essentially inviting in large numbers of people you don't have any control over how they're deciding to move. I know there's some incentives and people can offset, but that is their choices. Obviously, they're independent choices. So I think events have to think about their responsibility in the actual numbers of people that they're trying to attract by doing their work. So we, at Norfolk and Norwich Festival, we will also look every year to try and have an event that is of scale. So it could be something for an audience of 10 to 15,000 people, something like that, in a city centre, outdoors. And that's something we actively work towards. That's an important thing for us. Those gatherings, those collective moments are really, really important. And like I say, we can control an awful lot of those elements. Thinking back to the pyro, we did a high wire walk to launch the festival last year, and quite often a high wire walk will end in a fireworks display. We didn't think that was the right tone for our walk, and so we rang all the bells in the churches in the city when the wire walker arrived at the other end, and that was just something that we had available to us that made more sense, that had less of an impact, but still sort of celebrated this moment of arrival. So we think around those things, but how audiences move and around a rural county like Norfolk, where we are, that inevitably means driving. So all of I think if we could change one thing, it would be less to do with what we're doing for the actual festival and more to do with our audiences and how they and what we're asking them to do.
Thank you. I'm going to have to ask quite quickly, but so Claire, do you want to carry on audience, or do you want to pick up a different magic bullet that you want?
A magic bullet as far as what would be the best?
Yeah, one thing you could ignore budget.
Ignore budget. Okay, if we could ignore budget, then having the time to really carefully plan and design the most sustainable way that we're going to go on the road, and then in each place have at least a month with each community that we're going to, so that we can learn what they are doing, teach them what we are doing, and create a show that's very much got a sense of place, and then go on to the next one. From a budget perspective, that's normally way too expensive and completely impossible, and there's never any time, so you have to cut corners and not connect with the community or the culture. So I think that putting a value onto that kind of space and time for connection is the one thing I'd change in the way the whole economic system of the world works.
Yeah. Very quickly, have you got a thought that you thought, oh, if I could do anything, the same question to you?
The budget, the most expensive thing of any production is people and manpower, and quite often you end up having to make decisions, especially where we're at as a company, having to make decisions. What manpower can you afford versus how can you just get it done with a machine or more materials, or whatever.
Yeah.
Get there. And that's been really tough. The reason I say that is because when we were starting out, and for people that are starting out now, you've generally got a lot more manpower. There's a lot more people around up for getting involved and just really wanting to do something amazing. And it's incredible, like a big group of mates that are really up for it, and a trade a load of scrap. You can do some really cool stuff. So.
Yeah, that community makes a difference. I've got a question here for Claire. Are there any cultural considerations we should have when working nationally in the UK with diverse audience and partners? And can some decisions we make create barriers for some audiences or locations, or make it difficult to reach broad sections of society, which is going back to your point about being humble?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't claim to be an expert in this area at all, but from observations and my own experience, there's a lot of barriers sometimes. We've experienced this on the Arcadia shows, not necessarily, well, even nationally as well, but internationally, about how can people actually access the art full stop economically? Is there a barrier financially that means only if you're in this level of income, you're able to access that art? So it's trying to make sure that there's ways that the broader community can access it. And then secondly, with I feel like the language that we use sometimes can be a barrier as well. And this is something that I've reflected on in the environmental or climate change sphere, where it can often be coming from a lot of jargon and kind of uninspiring language that doesn't resonate with people's hearts. And so you're only going to get a very small cross section of society that are going to engage with that. And this is something that all of you have spoken about in relation to how the art can be a way of communicating these much more deeper on a very on a level that people can connect with these I suppose messages that we're trying to put across. That's another key point as well, not just putting messages across, but being open to receive messages too. I think that that's something where it's kind of across society, is trying to not go out and preach what we think is the best way to do things, but to make sure that we've always got a two-way flow between whatever production we may be creating and then the places where we're taking it to. There's more I could say on that, but maybe does anyone else want to jump in?
I think that's a really good point. It's definitely trying to do these things, talking about these things, and being really clear publicly that you are trying to do stuff and you welcome feedback, and please help us figure this out, because it's such a huge unknown quantity that we're dealing with, finding these solutions, that it takes a real open mind and a real collaborative approach to make it happen.
So just to add to those points, I think that I find it much more useful rather than people presenting a list of things that they've done, like we've done this, we've done this, we've done this. I think it's much more useful for people to share the things that they want to try and do, and also the reasons why they're not currently possible, what the obstacles are, what the challenges are, etc., etc. Because that's the conversation. That's the way to get the conversation started. If you just read a list of achievements, it doesn't really mean anything. Where do you go from there? There's no real next step. So I think when I've been thinking about how we want to communicate all of this on our website, I want a big list of things that we haven't done and that are really hard to do and that we don't know how to do.
Yeah, I think it's the humble thing, the sort of the community thing. It's about pulling people in. I think asking for help is always a great motivator and a very optimistic motivator.
Just to make one more comment on that, in relation to the need for creativity and working out how we're going to get through this colossal global challenge that none of us know actually how it works because we've not lived through it yet. With most Indigenous communities, and certainly those that we've had the fortune to connect with, the creatives and the creative outlets are really revered, and they're taken on a high level for decision making and for envisaging what the world could be like later or beyond now. And that is something that I think we really lack in our society, is that the creatives aren't taken as a part of the valid decision-making process, whether that's politically or however it may be. So that's why I think that to get a balance of the creativity making decisions is something that could help us get through this.
Hang on, I'm getting an instruction. Oh no. Sorry, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of thoughts here, isn't there? What would the success, I feel I'm risking repeating myself, but if you had to nail what sort of the success within the sector would be within festivals, what would be that, what would sustainability success look like? How can we sort of tie together the different points we've been talking about? Maybe Pip, what would you, yeah.
I think for me it highlights, I guess what I'm sort of trying to say is that, I spent a year at university as a mature student studying really hard, trying to get my head around sustainability. And after 1 year, part of the reason I left and went into art is because I realized it's such a big subject, there isn't actually an answer to that. Like after 1 year of studying it, I couldn't tell you sustainability is this. In fact, even the word is quite contradictory when you look at the evolution of life and what's going on. So I think festivals are a really good forum and art for people to come together and explore stuff and discuss stuff. And I don't think it's for anyone to say, this is what festivals have to be and this is what we're trying to create. I think it's almost the opposite. It's about, we need to start having this conversation and we need to start having it en masse as a race, and art and festivals are a way to start doing that.
Mark, have you any thoughts?
Yeah, I think exactly that. I think festivals, arts, culture is a way to talk about things. It's a way to think about things. I think that environmental justice goes hand in hand with social justice when it comes to festival and art presentations. And I think a success would be to have enabled other conversations that might not have happened otherwise to take place, and for us to be open and honest about failures and challenges equal to, if not more than, successes.
I think we have to wrap it up now. And there's a comment from someone: festivals as laboratories. I think what my feeling is, what all three of you have been talking about, is to be able to take a bit more time, for be able to more listening, more talking, more dreaming, and more, yes, within that dreaming, so what we haven't achieved, what we'd like to achieve, and that I think within the context of having to reinvent ourselves and what we do, I think if we look at the situation now, there has to be a big strand of our thinking in reinvention. I think that's very positive. So I'm going to say thank you very much for your excellent thoughts, and I hope everyone's enjoyed them at home. I don't know what to do now.
Yeah, cheers.
Thank you. Bye. I'll see you shortly.
Well, it's been a pleasure.